Alrighty, so our next one after boating is drive. Like a lazy cat, you stretched your arms above your head and yawned, blinking your eyes sleepily. The day was warm and pleasant, and you were lounging on the couch in the living room, finding it difficult to do much in that moment. Your moms and Liz had gone out shopping, looking for some new items for your sister to take back and decorate her college dorm with. They had asked if you wanted to go with them, but you declined. For you, today was all about relaxation. Cove had dropped by to spend some time with you, content to join in with doing nothing. The two of you had been chatting idly as you lazed around, talking about other things you had planned for the summer. He sat on one couch while you were fully stretched out on the other. You had your feet propped up on one of the armrests and stuffed a comfy cushion beneath your head, totally settled in. The day dragged on, and you found yourself yawning more and more often between conversations. You had almost dozed off completely when suddenly a buzz rang out, disturbing the silence. Your phone was on its charger in the kitchen, so it couldn't have been that. Cove pulled his own phone from his back pocket and checked the screen. It's my mom. After leaning forward and setting the phone on the coffee table in front of him, Cove hit the speaker button. Hey, what's up? Eclair is here too.
Hi.
Hi, Cove. Hello, Eclair. Hey, Mom 3. You knew your forwardness was making Cove regret putting it on speaker, but you were alright with that. Cove, baby, I wanted to ask you if you had a plan for all your junk. Cove made a small, outraged grumble, giving you a sidelong glance. That's not junk, it's important. Mm-hmm. Though you couldn't see it, you could tell by the sound of her voice that Kira was smiling.
Aha.
But is that a yes or no about the plan? He looked over at you, his mouth pulled into a tight smile. I'm still thinking about it. Eclair. I'm gonna take the phone off speaker so me and Mom can go over this. It'll be quick. Without waiting for an answer, Cove took the phone from the table and pushed himself to his feet. He hit the speaker button again to turn it off and continued the conversation with his mom as he headed towards the door. The lock clicked behind him as he exited the house, and he sank back into the cushion, idly trying to decide what to do next. After electing to grab your own phone from its charger, you resumed your position on the couch, tapping away at the screen. Your mind drifted away from the thoughts of Cove and his phone call, with all the many ways your device could distract you. It was an effective enough way to kill the time, and you had managed to do various little things when the door opened again and Cove returned.
Hey.
I hope you managed without me. You watched as Cove strolled over to where you were still sitting. How did the call go?
That's...
Oh, well... He sighed dramatically and let his forehead fall against the couch back, his ponytail flopping forward all over the front cushion. I know I just came back from visiting my mom, but... Well, last time I flew there, every time I just fly there and back, and so there's a lot of stuff I've left over there because I couldn't take it all with me on the plane. Now that I'm not gonna be visiting her like I used to, I'll have to go get it at the same time at some point. He gave you a look that you thought seemed almost guilty. Some of it is pretty big, so it's not really practical to have it shipped. I can drive over and pick it up. When will you go? That's what my mom wanted to know. She thought it'd be best to do it soon before things get even busier. He paused and let out a soft sigh, his shoulders dropping, as if he really didn't want to be the one to have to tell you that. I think that's probably the idea that makes the most sense too. It'd be good to get it over and done with. I'll be setting out as soon as I can. Oh, another trip already? Then. He sighed and dropped his head again. You could tell he wasn't any happier about having to go than you were about seeing him leave. It's not a big deal. The quicker you leave, the quicker you'll come back, right? Yeah. Looking up again, Hugh met his bright aquamarine eyes, finding a sad smile tugging on his lips. Oh. Suddenly his eyebrows jumped, and his eyes lit up like a lamp. You could come with me. What? You should come. My visits to my mom's are usually special, so she and I can spend time together. But this time it's not like that. It's an errand. My plan is to drive out one morning, spend that night, and then we can pack up the car the next morning and turn right back around. It'll only take 2 days for the whole thing. You thought to yourself for a moment, amused by Cove's excitement. Are you sure it'd be okay if I go?
I mean...
Yeah, why not? I probably could use the company. It's a pretty long drive for one person. A sprinkling of color spread over his cheeks as he admitted quietly, "And I'd just really like to have you around. Plus, you'd have a chance to see my mom in person. I know she'd be happy to see you again." You wrinkle your nose, supposing that would be all right after all, if he was so sure about it. "All right, I can come. I'll have to let my moms know, but as long as we've got nothing else important on the days we pick, then there's no reason I wouldn't be able to go." Cove's face brightened, and you were sure the prospect of having a travel buddy made the task seem less tiresome. "I'll call my mom back and tell her we can pick a time right now." You spent some time together going over your schedules and making plans for when you could take the trip. You needed to fit it in around both of your work schedules, which took a bit of doing but came together in the end. Luckily, it was only a 2-day trip, so finding a couple free days in a row wasn't impossible. It wasn't long before the dates were finally set, and all the plans were made. You were content with the plans. It would be a good chance for you to get out and see more of the country, and it wasn't much of an inconvenience. No matter what you thought about things, the morning when you were due to leave arrived. It was cooler than usual, the sun barely peeking over the tops of the houses. You stood outside your house on the footpath near the road waiting for Cove. You were feeling refreshed after a good night's sleep and an early wake-up. With your travel bag clutched in one hand, you watched as Cove finish packing up his car. He had organized all sorts of things, water bottles, snacks, and who knows what else. Cove insisted he had everything under control and didn't need help. At least you could rest easy, knowing that it was all taken care of. As you waited, you glanced over Cove's car. You knew it well. It used to belong to Mr. Holden, and when Cove had learned to drive, it passed to him. His dad had taken the opportunity to get a newer one. It was pretty old at this point, but had served both of them well so far. You just hoped it had enough life left in it to survive a trip as long as the one you were embarking on. The slam of a door closing made you jump. You snapped back to focus and saw Cove was walking towards you. He dusted his hands off on his pants and tilted his head towards the car. "That's it. Ready to go?" "Yeah, I'm ready." He smiled and stepped aside, giving you space to situate your own bag where you wanted it. Once everything was safely inside, you glanced back at you.
All right.
"We should get started. It's gonna be a ways to go." You gave him a high five. He returned it happily, chuckling at your enthusiasm. The two of you climbed into the car and buckled up. Cove in the driver's seat and you sitting shotgun. His eyes moved to you.
Thank you.
"Thanks again for coming on this trip with me." "You're welcome." After checking the mirrors and starting the engine, you pulled out of the driveway and the trip began. With a small sigh, you got cozy in your seat and watched the familiar houses in your neighborhood pass by. Cove reached over to turn on the radio. A crackle of static mixed with the odd snippets of songs filled the car as he flipped through the stations. Mr. Holden's car was in good condition, but it was, well, older. There was no way to plug in a phone to play music, so the radio had to do. Eventually, he settled on Top 40 station before sitting back and resting both hands on the wheel. "Is this okay?" "Yeah, it works." He smiled, happy with the answer. Time flew by, and with it, the scenery outside your window became more and more unfamiliar. It was a little fluttery, being alone in the car with Cove for so long. There was nowhere else you would have rather been. Every now and then you'd look over and sneak a glance at him, wondering what he was thinking about. Eventually, Cove broke the silence, clearing his throat softly before he spoke. "It's been too long since you and I have spent time with my mom. I know she still comes to the neighborhood sometimes, but it's not even once a year. I'm always going to hers. I'm happy the two of us are doing this." "Yeah, me too. But speaking of your mom and trips, remember the time she took us on that crazy drive all across town?" He shook his head at the memory, his laughter clear and bright. "Oh, I remember. I kept worrying about papers and shoes while you were having a blast." "I wonder what I was thinking. That really was over the top." He smiled quietly to himself, clutching the wheels a little more confidently. With the crinkle of his eyebrows, a look of nostalgia crossed over Cove's features. "Mom always knew how to make things memorable. I can't deny that." Silence slowly crept back into the space, both of you thinking back on that night and all the memories you had of it. Your elbow resting on the windowsill, you gazed out at the world that was slowly coming to life as the morning rolled on by. The sun climbed higher in the sky, forcing you to adjust the visor of your head to keep it out of your eyes. "Hey, do you mind reaching back for me?" Cove gave you a sidelong glance as he drove, indicating with a nod of his head and a teeny smile. "I want some chips. The salt and vinegar ones." That's a great flavor."
Right?
"Right? Eat whatever you want, too. I brought a bunch of everything. I love salt and vinegar chips, especially sea salt and vinegar chips." Actually, I did. I don't eat them as much as I used to. I like the jalapeno, the kettle cooked jalapeno chips now. Stretching out the seat belt to give yourself space, you twisted in your spot and reached into the bag holding the snacks. It took a bit of effort to sort through the collection of goodies stuffed inside, but eventually the bag of chips crinkled beneath your fingers as you pulled them out and sat back in your seat. Here. Thanks. Do you mind opening it? His eyes lit up at the prospect of the snacks, and you shook your head in amusement, popping the top of the bag. He poured a few chips into his hand. Cove held out one outstretched hand while trying to resist the urge to look at what he was getting. You did your best to have the chips fall into his palm, but some did end up on the floor. Thanks. After that, you rolled up the top of the bag and stowed the chips safely in the back again. When you turned to the front, it was to find Cove crushing the fistful of chips into his mouth, crunching loudly. He wiped his hands on his pants absent-mindedly before gripping the wheel and spilling crumbs all over the place. You're like a little kid. He snorted and pulled a hand from the wheel once more to flick the salty residue from his fingers at you. With a gasp, you raised an arm to defend yourself. You shook your head at the mess of crumbs that fell from his mouth as he chuckled. See what I mean? The hours drifted by much the same way as that, with the two of you snacking and chatting as the day stretched on. It was fairly calm and quiet traveling along the open road, and you found little in the way of interruptions. At one point you passed a "Welcome to Nevada" sign, and Cove gave a teeny cheer. He was in disbelief that the two of you were seriously all the way in another state like this. Eventually you had to stop for gas and made a detour at a small diner to grab a proper meal that didn't consist of chips and candy. After refueling both the car and your stomachs, the drive was back on, just as the sun began to dip beneath the horizon and bathe the sky in a wash of orange light. Cove informed you that there wasn't too much longer left to go. You were almost there. You took shifts driving through the trip. The route was fairly straightforward, and you'd had enough practice with driving to feel comfortable doing so. When night eventually fell and the blanket of darkness, the drive finally came to an end. Cove pulled into the parking lot of Kira's apartment building, the glow of the car lights disappearing as he turned off the engine and let out a heavy sigh. We made it! We're here! The two of you exchanged tired smiles, having successfully and safely completed one half of the trip. You were relieved to have actually arrived and eager to get out of the car and stretch your legs. You took the stairs up to the building together. After a knock, you were abruptly met by a flash of green hair as Kira opened the door and immediately took her son in her arms. There he is, my gigantic baby boy. She squeezed him for a moment and then pulled back so she could examine his face. Are you even taller than the last time I saw you? Cove gave her a fond look as she patted the tops of his shoulders proudly. You say that every time I'm here. It doesn't even make sense right now. My last visit wasn't that long ago. Kira simply laughed before letting him go fully and ushered the two of you into her apartment. Then she turned to you, a wide grin pulling at her lips. Claire, it's so nice you came along with, and as a bonus, you've both arrived in one piece. It's nice to see you. Kira beamed at you both, and while you would have loved nothing more than to settle down and rest after the drive, you could see she wasn't going to let you go that easily. So how was the trip? I admit, I was just a pinch worried. We barely made it. Cove gave you a dry look, a small smile tilting his lips. We handled it just fine. Kira clapped her hands together, the bracelets around her wrists jingling. I'm so proud. I can hardly believe how mature you both are. Where'd all of those smarts come from? Cove ran a hand over his hair with an awkward chuckle. I don't know. Maybe I got some from my parents. His mom looked at him deeply, her eyes glistening as she shook the sentimentality off with a wave of her hand. You have to be half asleep already, huh? I don't want to keep you up much longer, early morning in any whoosies. How do you want to deal with the sleeping arrangements? I've only got my own room in Cove's, though the living room couch isn't bad. You keep your bed, Mama. Claire can use mine, and I'll sleep on the couch. Or the floor. Whatever's easiest. It doesn't matter for one night. Kira gave him a skeptical look, her lips bent into a teasing grin. What? I wonder why I don't believe you'll stay on the floor when Claire is right there in your bed. Cove froze in shock, his cheeks turning a dark, beet red. Then his eyes narrowed, and he scolded her with a harsh whisper. Mom! Kira giggled to herself, but managed to give him an apologetic look upon seeing he was less than impressed by her teasing. Sorry, baby, I'm only pointing out the obvious. He put a hand on Cove's arm to show some support. He gave you a grateful smile, and Kira cooed at the two of you.
Hey!
Mom! She finally let it drop, and you tried to move on. I'll sleep on the couch in the living room. Cove shook his head, dismissing the idea immediately.
No.
You're the guest. which is exactly why I should have the couch. I don't want to take your bed. Well, I still don't want to take it from you, and I said it first. The two of you narrowed your eyes at each other stubbornly. Kira took that as her cue to step in. My house, my rules then, and you know who I have to side with. I'd like you to take the bed, Eclair. You hesitated a moment, but it seemed you had to accept the hospitality. With a small sigh, you gave in. All right. Cool.
So,
Would you be okay with me sleeping on the floor in the room? I'd rather be there than out in the open in the living room, even if there is the couch. Yeah, you can sleep there. Kira giggled softly, drawing your attention back to her. All funny stuff aside, you need to get some sleep for tomorrow. Seems like you're setting yourselves up to not get any. I know that sounds really captious, but I'm a mom. I have to say these things. Come on, we're not little kids having a sleepover. We're responsible adults, right, Eclair? Well, I am. Cove, though. Hey. You chuckled quietly to yourself as Cove gave you a disapproving look. I'll leave it at that then, for now. Just remember that the walls are thin in this apartment. If you can't settle down and sleep, I might have to separate you. We'll be good.
Marvelous.
Perfect. Kira clasped her hands together, her bracelets softly tinkling against each other. It's only getting later, so I better let you prepare for bed. She nodded towards the hallway and gave you a small smile. I'll play hostess for a sec and show you where the bathroom is first, Eclair, and where you'll be staying the night. Thank you. You hoisted your travel bag back over your shoulders and followed behind Kira and down the hallway. Cove shuffled along behind you, disappearing into the bedroom while his mom had you go to the restroom. The apartment was small but nicely decorated in soft, cool colors, with plenty of artwork hanging on the walls to give it character. It was stylish and exactly what you would have expected from someone like Kira. After being shown the bathroom and wishing Kira a good night, you headed into the room and found Cove already there. He had changed into his sleepwear for the night as well. Looking around, you found the bedroom to look much the same as the rest of the apartment, but with small ocean elements you were sure Cove must have enjoyed when he stayed here. All in all, the room was pretty clean, and though it almost looked more like a hotel guest room than a bedroom. Cove only spent a few weeks out of the year there, so it made sense that it wasn't especially lived in.
so?
What do you think? It's pretty nice, huh? Mom always keeps it clean and everything, even when I'm not here. That's sweet of her. Yeah, she's good like that. He seemed pleased enough with the response and gave you a small smile before opening the zip on his bag. When you went back to the room, you jumped in bed and under the covers, just as Cove was shuffling into his sleeping bag on the floor. You waited until he was settled in before you flipped off the lights, and a soft glow from the outside peeked through the blinds, casting shadow over the floor. You closed your eyes, blocking everything out.
Night.
Night, Eclair. Good night. The room grew quiet as the two of you wound down for the night, and you found yourself listening to the sounds of the city outside the window. The noise out there was so different to what you were used to back home. Cars zooming past and people out having fun instead of crashing waves and the ocean winds cocooning your house in their embrace. Cove shifted around in his sleeping bag, making the fabric crinkle loudly. I've outgrown this thing. I should have checked it earlier, but the trip was kind of short notice. Are you really sure you don't want the bed? I don't mind trading places. No, it's alright. It's more important that you're comfortable.
Don't worry about it.
You're already doing me a big favor by coming here in the first place. Just let me do this one thing and give you the bed. That's what I wanted for this trip, okay? Pursing your lips tight, you gave a small nod and admitted defeat. Alright, I'll have the bed. Thanks, Cove. He made a small noise but said no more. With an accepting sigh, you pulled the covers up under your chin and got comfortable. The next day dawned, bringing with it the sounds of birds chirping happily outside the window. You opened your eyes slowly, letting them adjust the lights as you tried to recall where you were and remembering the unfamiliar sight of Cove's second bedroom. You reached over to turn off the alarm you had set. It took you a moment to find the off button on your phone, and you sighed in relief when the noise finally stopped. The sound of Cove shuffling around the room drew your attention, though you weren't surprised. He'd always been a morning person. Sitting up in bed, you let out a yawn and stretched your arms above your head. You felt okay. Considering the long drive the day before and the late night, you were feeling ready to get the day started. Though you weren't as perky as him, his energy was infectious. Good morning. You pulled yourself out of bed, grabbing a fresh change of clothes and your toiletries before heading to the bathroom. After all that, you met Cove back in his room. He was sitting on the floor when you entered, sorting through a bunch of stuff in a box, determining what to bring and what to leave behind. Hey,
Hey.
can you pull out the stuff in those drawers? You nodded, though he hadn't even looked up from his task, so you knew he wouldn't have seen. Heading over to his drawers, you started the task of taking out various items and setting them on the ground in front of Cove. Another hour passed by in silence, and you were happy to see you were making great progress with Cove's room, with only the closet left to sort through. You took a minute to take a mouthful of water from your bottle and perched on the edge of the bed, feeling productive. Cove glanced over at you and paused, putting down the tape gun he had been using to seal up his box. You raised an eyebrow. You know, it's really strange to see you sitting in this room. Why? He frowned a little, his eyes distant and his voice quiet when he spoke next.
That's...
During the visits to Mom's, when I was sitting alone in this room, I'd sometimes think about how you weren't here. It was a weird feeling at the time that you just weren't around, and now that you are here in this exact place, I don't know how to explain the feeling. He shrugged it off and smiled a little, as though he'd said enough already and didn't want to risk sounding silly. Life was pretty confusing, is all. That's true. Life makes no sense. But I think we've both managed to navigate it well enough so far. He smiled slightly, nodding his head a little. Yeah, I hope so. He looked away satisfied, heading over to the closet and the last of the items to be sorted. Before long, every box, closet, and drawer had been thoroughly combed through, with the items either neatly packed up in boxes or organized and returned to their proper place. With a sigh of relief, you glanced around the bedroom and the work you had done together.
All right.
We're done. Good job to us. I'm going to change out of my PJs for the drive. Yeah. When the two of you headed out into the living room, ready to get everything finalized and hit the road, you found Kira in the kitchen pouring a cup of tea. Cove headed towards her, leaning casually against the counter that divided the two spaces. Hey, you didn't have to get up so early.
Come on.
Are you crazy? Of course I have to see you off before you go. You can't sneak away while I'm out cold. Excuse me. She beamed at him and, in all honesty, seemed more than happy to be up and getting ready for the day. Do you want some breakfast? I've got some mazui, I wonder what that is, or eggs and toast. Oh, and some of that fruity cereal you used to love. That's okay, we should really eat on the road. Kira smiled sadly, a little disappointed, but she seemed to understand that your time was running thin. I thought you might say that. In that case, I've packed you some snacks for the road.
What do you think?
Even if you don't end up eating them, take it anyway, just in case. You can always feed them to Cliff when you get home and tell him I said hi. Cove laughed and shook his head, knowing his dad would love nothing more than to polish off whatever food Kira had prepared for you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mom. You really didn't have to. It must be a mom thing to know this stuff. Kira smiled before resting her gaze on Cove fondly. One of the many pleasures of being a parent. She returned your smile with one of her own before putting her cup of tea aside. Well, I'll help you get the car packed.
Sure.
Sure, thanks. The three of you got a move on, taking boxes from Carv's bedroom and heading down to fill the back seat of the car, until there was barely an inch of space left in the back and the trunk. With all of you helping, it only took a couple of trips to move everything, and you were done before you knew it. Then it was truly time to say goodbye. You convened back inside the apartment where Kira looked over the two of you with a quiet smile. It was great to see you both. Thank you for coming. She gave each of you a hug, and you felt a little sad that you hadn't been able to spend more time with her. It was good to see you too, Mom. Cove embraced her in return, and the two of them holding onto each other for a few seconds longer. I'll miss you, but I'll visit again soon.
Of course.
You better. Hey, we should make plans for you to visit us too. I'll let you know when it's settled. I'd love that. Kira bundled all the stuff she prepared into a bag and handed them over to you. You took a quick peek at what she had packed. There were fruits, nuts, seeds, and hard-boiled eggs and some veggie sticks.
Cool.
Oh, good to see we've got some fresh food options now. The snacks I brought weren't. Kira shook her head at him and let out a soft laugh, as though she wouldn't have expected anything else. I seriously hope you're feeding yourself better than that at home. Yeah, of course, just not on trips. I can live with that then. She looked over him fondly, her eyes at least focusing on his face and filling with emotion. I'm going to miss you, baby.
Me too.
Thank you for letting us come. No problem at all. You're welcome anytime. Kira put an arm around you both, pulling you in tight to her sides for one final squeeze. Have a safe trip. We will. With a last goodbye, you exited the apartment, though Cove hesitated for a moment in the door, his expression distant. You weren't sure what he was doing, though you tentatively took a step towards him. Everything okay? Your voice seemed to bring him back to earth, and he shook his head to clear his thoughts, his green hair swaying from side to side.
Come on.
Yeah, let's go. With that, the two of you headed back down to the car, ready to make the long trip home. Soon enough, you were on the wide, open road with a car full of Cove's things and only one destination, Sunset Bird, California. The drive went as smoothly as could be expected, with the morning slowly creeping into midday as the miles flew by. After a while, you switched places with Cove and took over driving for a couple of hours. The day flew by in a whir of open road and sunshine, and before you knew it, it was early afternoon. By that point, you had already crossed the state line. Cove announced that he had planned a little stop on the way home. He was quite pleased with himself as you arrived at the precipice. The Redwood National Park. Shaded beneath a canopy of enormous redwood trees, you drove along. When Cove parked the car, you pushed the door to get out, and the first thing you did was look up. Enormous redwood trees surrounded you on all sides, their massive trunks shooting straight up into the canopy of foliage overhead. There were too many of them to count, stretching on and on as far as you could see. You squinted against the sunlight that was peeking through the leaves and dancing on the paths around you. It's great, right? He smiled at you from over the roof of the car before glancing around the place fondly. Remember the trip our families took here that one summer? It was cool going on a journey and seeing the forest in person, even if we didn't stay very long. And I guess we can stay for even less this time, but oh well. It just seemed like a good time to stop by. Who knows when we'll get another chance. His voice got a little softer at the end. It seemed to be bittersweet for him, being in a place he was so fond of, but not having the time to appreciate it fully. You were pleased to have stopped here. It was a beautiful place to stretch your legs and take in some fresh air. There will be more chances in the future, I promise. Cove smiled, shoving his hands in his pockets and dipping his head. I'm gonna hold you to that. The two of you walked around for a while, completely dwarfed by the sheer scale of the redwoods. It kind of put your view of yourself and everything in a strange perspective. You took in a lungful of clean forest air, listening to the sounds of bird song and the cool breeze rustling through the underbush, taking advantage of the space to move around freely. However you felt about being there, it was a totally different scene than sitting in that old car for hours and hours. You were feeling nervous, so kept your distance from Cove. You felt his gaze on you. When you looked over, he flushed and quickly turned away, and you had to bite down on your lip to keep yourself from smiling. Being here again, you couldn't help but reminisce on what else had happened during the trip you had taken here all that time ago. There were a lot of things that had reminded you of it recently. You looked over at Cove, who seemed to be lost in the peace of the place, and you wondered if any of it crossed his mind. Smiling at the sight, you thought back on what had been a highlight of that long-gone vacation. Remember how the bird stole your dad's lunch? Cove instantly started laughing at the memory of the bird taking off with Mr. Holden's sandwich. After all these years, it was still a once-in-a-lifetime sight. Poor Dad, he can never catch a break. You continued chatting about the trip a little while longer, about the things you had seen and done and even eaten. A lot of the memories Cove had of the trip were similar to your own, but you were also surprised to hear of a few other things from his point of view. So much had happened that there was no shortage of things to talk about. The place certainly had a nostalgic quality about it. Your spirits were light as you rambled past information boards and picnic areas. But before long, you decided it was time to bring this short stop to an end and head back to the car to get on the road again. Cove sighed when he finally reached the vehicle, jangling the keys in his hand before unlocking the doors.
Well,
I wish we didn't have to go, but we're going to be responsible and not stay longer than we should. How grown up of you. He smiled slightly, and with that, the two of you jumped into the car, buckling in and put it in drive. You were getting closer and closer to town as the sun started setting, though through where still far away enough that the radio stations were unfamiliar to you. Cove twisted the dial this way and that before stumbling into a channel with a song he seemed to like. That was a rare gift from the fates in a sea of static, strange radio jockeys and grating tunes. His face immediately brightened at the sound of it, and he drummed his fingers along the bottom of the steering wheel happily. Sitting back in his seat, he bopped his head and shimmied his shoulders in time to the tune, all while mouthing along to the words. Occasionally, he even lifted one hand from the wheel to gesture with his fingers for a specific line. He chuckled softly. Cove looked over and rolled his eyes with a smile, clearly enjoying himself despite everything. The song ended, and Cove reached over to start cycling through the radio station again. Upon finding nothing tolerable, he flipped the dial off in defeat and leaned back in his seat with a sigh. You rested your head on your hand and stared out the window as the sky darkened, watching the landscape slowly melt into more familiar views. The miles went on, and any energy you had earlier was beginning to drain away. You imagined home and your family. You'd be there together soon. You know, I've spent all these years living in Sunsetford and taking a few weeks each summer visiting my mom in that second room. That's not going to happen anymore. Not really.
I mean,
I can still see my parents, but the way it all works between us has changed. Forever. He paused, the silence stretching. A serious look settled on his face, his thoughts far away. I feel the same way about my parents too. I know they'll always be there for me, but we don't really have the same relationship we used to. Cove's mouth pulled into a tight line, and he gave a small nod. You got the feeling that he understood how you felt. Cove stared straight ahead, down the long, long road. The path looked like it'd never end from where you were. But that wasn't true. Eventually, he found a few more words to say.
I'm so glad.
I think it's good we were able to do this trip. Without any parents or chaperones, it was just us. We did it all. I don't know. I feel a little more independent now, a little more ready for what's ahead. I'm not sure I'll ever be ready. The thought of leaving home, my mom's, it's scary. Cove sighed solemnly. The topic seemed to wear on Cove, and he made an attempt to find something else to speak on. So I'm kind of sad about getting back. I'm gonna miss having you right there tonight. He grimaced and leaned forward, his shoulders tense and his eyes hyper-focused on the road ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't mean for that to sound weird or anything. It's just nice to hang out. That isn't strange. I can understand it. Cove gave you a small smile, one that you returned, and the two of you fell into more comfortable silence. The sky outside grew ever darker as the hours passed by, the stars blinking on like teeny fireflies painted into a canvas of blue. The scenery continued transitioning between open roads, industrial areas, and beach towns, becoming increasingly recognizable as time went on. You felt somewhat disconnected from the world around you as you watched it through your window, your tired mind growing hazy. It was strange, reflective feeling, but peaceful nonetheless. Soon enough, the world would return to you, and you'd find your feet firmly on the ground. Couldn't be helped. The adventure would end, life would continue, but your memories would linger on. All right, so our next one is reflection. After finishing breakfast at the Holden's house, you and Cove had retreated to his room to relax before starting the day in earnest. Or perhaps you would take it easy for the whole afternoon. Neither of you had plans exactly, so you were free to do whatever came to mind. You fiddled with a Rubik's Cube Cove had around. For every row you locked into the right place, there was at least one that snuck away from where you wanted it to be. Even with your mind elsewhere, you could tell Cove was similarly at ease. He had his chin propped up with one hand as he scrolled through his phone. A burst of laughter broke the silence, hooking your attention and bringing you back to the present. You looked at Cove for an explanation. His eyes, now crinkled with mirth, were still locked on his screen. What happened? He finally looked up at you, smirking. Dad scanned some old photos. You know, he drew a rectangle in there with the phone freehand. Printed out ones, back from when I was little. He texted it all to me last night, I guess. I've been checking them out. Can I see? Cove narrowed his eyes, smile still bent. I was gonna show you. I just wanted to look at it first to make sure there was nothing super embarrassing. You never know with my dad. He grimaced. Emphasizing what the horrors his dad might unwittingly spring on him.
I mean,
What if there's a photo of me getting potty trained or something? You laughed at Cove's proud expression. Yeah, that sounds like something your dad would do. Cove only cleared his throat nervously, the fear of his dad's well-meaning action still looming large in his mind. Anyway, before we forget, I was laughing because I came across a Halloween one from when I was 8, the year I was a zombie, remember? He shook his head, grinning wearily while holding the phone out to you. He walked over and took a seat in the bed next to him to get the full view. I never even liked zombies. All I wanted was to show off my new scar, and it needed to be something scary. I couldn't be a normal person who had a scar, according to my 8-year-old mind. I was a little dork.
Right?
Dad really wanted to be useful, as usual. He came up with the idea of being an undead person. It was pretty good, huh? Oh, man. I remember you got lots of extra candy when the adults realized the scar was real. It must have been your greatest Halloween haul ever. Tove chuckled at your reply. I can't believe how much larger my scar used to be. He looked down at his arm, a soft smile on his face, and traced what remained of the jagged line with his fingers, just as you'd seen him do countless times before. His voice was playful when he spoke again. Look at how teeny it is now. How am I gonna pretend to be tough without a big scar? Cove, you never fooled anyone. I know. Cove smiled bashfully, pleased with his joke, and ducked his head to look away from you. His fingers were still tracing the scarred patch of skin. I really do like having this, even if it's kind of little these days. His voice was shy, like he was letting you in on a big secret. Cove turned back to face you fully, finally letting go of his scar. He was happy. That mark was a part of him and clearly held meaning for Cove. You smiled back at him. The scar had been there as long as you'd known Cove, though when you'd first met it had been concealed by that neon pink cast.
So?
Want to hear I managed to go jet skiing when I was 8? You were initially stunned that he'd guessed what you were thinking, though given the topic of conversation and the direction of your gaze, it was a natural conclusion to reach. Not bothered by your reaction, Cove continued with a shrug. I don't mind telling you, it's nothing special. He rubbed the back of his neck, grinning sheepishly. Mostly it's just really dumb. You nodded. That was something you'd like to hear more about, especially knowing that no lasting harm had come from it. Cove stared into the distance, lips parted as he readied the story in his mind. So me, my dad, and Mom were at a party. I don't know if it was casual get-together or a specific celebration. I hope it wasn't for something meaningful, considering how I ended it. He winced, then managed a bashful smile. Anyway, my mom and dad were off doing stuff, talking to people. I guess I was left with the other non-adults. Most of them were older than I was. Maybe all of them were? His brow furrowed as he tried to recall dusty memories, then he shrugged again and continued. The older kids were taking turns on the jet skis. There weren't enough for everyone to ride at once, so in between turns they were hanging out on the shore. I was meant to just sit there with them and watch. Remembering when you'd first met Cove, you bet that he hadn't been satisfied with that arrangement. He confirmed that suspicion. I was pretty unhappy. It wasn't a party for me, not when all I could do was look at other people have fun when I couldn't. The teens must have realized that, though I never hid when I was pouting as a kid.
Well,
Basically, someone offered to let me ride. I was way too small to drive it myself, but this older kid, they must have been at least 16, said I could sit in front of them while they controlled the jet ski. He chuckled at your wide-eyed horror. I knew I wasn't supposed to do anything like that. Still, I figured my parents were doing whatever they wanted, so why couldn't I? I nodded at the person, and I remember the other teens helping me onto the jet ski along with the one driving. We sped off into the water. Cove smiled widely and wistfully. It was amazing, at first. My hair was flying everywhere as we zoomed away from the shore. I loved being out in the water like that. Too bad it turned out steering a jet ski with an 8-year-old sat on your lap was harder than a bunch of kids figured it would be. The team tried their best, but they couldn't keep control for long. They got spun around and went right into the sand. You sucked in a deep breath. The other person wasn't hurt, thankfully. They held onto the bars and stayed in their seat. I didn't. I was thrown at full speed into a rocky part of the shore near the dock. I must have tried to brace for impact or catch myself because my arm is what I mostly landed on. He looked down at the limb in question. You could see him visualizing the long-healed scar. Injury. It was pretty torn up. After that, it's hazy for me. I got taken to the hospital. I didn't feel a lot of pain when it first happened. All I remember thinking about was how I was covered in sand and the grains were uncomfortable. The sand was uncomfortable? Cove chuckled. I know, right? I did start feeling my arm later. It definitely hurt eventually. The doctor said my arm was broken, along with being torn open. That's how I ended up getting my pink cast. He smiled nostalgically. That color, it seemed just nice and happy at the time. It brightened the mood, so I picked it. The smile faded. He finished the story with a sigh, his eyes downcast. I feel bad I did any of that. I hope whoever that teen was, they weren't traumatized by seeing a little kid go flying into the ground. They were just trying to do a nice thing. Cove threw arms out to the side dramatically. I wish I knew who they were so I could give them a call and say I'm still in one piece. But yeah, that's the full story. I'm so glad you are both okay in the long run. That's the important thing. Cove sighed again, the regret written plainly on his face. It was a failure. That's just the truth. He smiled flatly, but to my credit, I think I've grown a lot since then. Wait. Cove's eyes went completely wide. Suddenly, reinvigorated, he seized his phone and tapped away at the screen. What? I knew it. You weren't sure that he'd heard you, but he set his phone down and turned to face directly to you. His face was resolute. Though the glow of the screen was no longer reflected in his eyes, they seemed to sparkle even brighter than before. Claire, we're adults. We can decide things for ourselves now. Okay. The age requirement to rent a jet ski in California is 18. We could totally do it. Yes! Cove beamed, pumping the air with both fists. Definitely the action of someone mature enough to rent a vehicle. All right. Within a moment, Cove had recovered and returned to his serious expression from before. I'll be careful, and I really want you to be there when I try again. Please? His voice was soft and earnest. You could tell how much the request meant to him. You also knew him enough to know that he wasn't going to give up on this idea. Letting him go on his own wasn't an option. Of course I'll be there. I wouldn't miss it. I'd be interested to try jet skiing. Cove perked up at once. A grin stretched wide across his face. He was practically bouncing in place. Let's go! You got up and worked as a team to gather everything needed for the trip. Cove's other aquatic hobbies came in handy, and he was quickly kitted out with everything he'd need other than the jet skis themselves. You needed to run back home briefly, having dressed and prepared for a day that didn't involve jet skiing. But soon enough, you were both ready and jumping into Cove's car. As you got in, you learned that Cove had used the brief time apart to locate a rental store on his phone. You caught his eye as he clicked your seatbelt into place. Excited, you held out a hand. Cove slapped it in a high five before setting off. You and Cove soon arrived. The ocean was perfectly inviting today. The deep blue of the water glittered under the clear sky while the tide rolled in and out at its leisure. I'm so excited for this. His excitement was adorable. Seeing how pleased you were, Cove grinned at you.
Hey.
Oh, hey, want to say hi to my dad while we're here? I've already texted my mom about the plan. He's working right now. You remembered how close the shop was. It wouldn't take long, even by walking. You nodded, not minding the detour. Mr. Holden was a great guy, so you were happy to check in on him.
Sorry.
Thanks. Sorry, it might be kind of awkward when he hears why we're here, but it should be alright. I mean, my parents forgave me a long time ago for that amazing stunt. I don't want to be scared off jet skiing for my whole life because of it. You wondered which of you Cove was attempting to reassure. It was only a short walk back down the dock to Mr. Holden's scuba shop. Tears. Okay, so last time I went through this one, I cried, like, a little bit from now, I cried and I just couldn't stop crying, so this might take me a little bit longer to get through. Cove breezed in, as familiar with the store as he was with his own home. The place was quiet, empty aside from a couple of customers quietly browsing and Cove's dad behind the counter. Mr. Holden looked up, his friendly expression spreading into a grin when he saw who had just entered.
Hey!
Hi, Claire. Hey, sport. What brings you all the way out here? And cast an eye at the way the two of you were dressed. Judging by how you're decked out, I'm guessing scuba diving? There's plenty here for that. What can I help you with? Cove chuckled, amused by how quickly his dad seized on a favorite topic. Or maybe it was how his dad always fell over himself trying to be useful. Hi, Dad. We're not doing that this time. We sort of decided to go rent a couple of jet skis. The phrase jet skis had set Mr. Holden's mouth into a taut line immediately. Jet skis. He echoed the word as his eyes instinctively darted to the scar on Cove's arm. That's when Mr. Holden started to speak several times, each attempt quickly abandoned. Cove smiled encouragingly, trying not to add to his father's worries.
Don't worry about
I
it.
promise I'll be careful, and Claire will be there too. We always look out for each other. Mr. Holden pinched his face back into an unconvincing smile.
Right.
All right. You're a whole lot bigger now than you were back then. Heck, you can drive a car and everything. I'm sure you and Eclair will have plenty of fun." The worry still echoed out in his voice, barely concealed by the positive words, but Cove was buoyed by his father's support. "Yeah, well, we're all set. We only stopped by to say hi and let you know, since we were over here." Mr. Holden beamed, obviously moved by his son's simple consideration. "Wow, you're so thoughtful. Thanks for taking the time." Cove gave his dad a crooked smile, shaking his head bashfully. He'd long stopped fighting his dad's effusive praise, but that didn't mean he'd ever become good at accepting it. Mr. Holden simply laughed at his son's response. "It'd be great if you could keep me in the loop while you're out there. To just text me to let me know if it's going well or anything." "I will." His dad smiled more easily.
Great.
Cove rubbed his arm, causing Mr. Holden's eyes to momentarily twitch back to the childhood injury.
Bye.
"We're gonna head out. See you later. Take care." "Goodbye." Mr. Holden waved you off as you left the store. The pair of you headed back to the docks, walking side by side. After your feet hit the boards, Cove's pace fell. Glancing over, you saw him looking down, out over the water. That wouldn't have been unusual if his expression hadn't been so somber. He wasn't geared up with anticipation, or even nervousness, but with an uncharacteristic lethargy. Something was weighing heavy on his mind. You nudged him gently. "Huh?" He blinked, startled by your interrupting his rumination.
Sorry.
He sighed. Though you'd torn his attention from the ocean, it gradually drifted back to the water. You cleared your throat, unwilling to lose him again. "Sorry again." He put his hands to his face, rubbing his eyes wearily. "Here I go, thinking everything's resolved with what's happened and we can have fun, but I can't just enjoy anything. I had to find something else to get stuck in my head." "You're having second thoughts about jet skiing?"
No.
"No, that's not it." The ends of his lips were drawn into the beginning of a frown, like gray clouds clustering to signal the coming of a storm. "I figured my dad would be a little worried about me doing it, but what he was saying, it wasn't what I expected. He was so sad, was more than nervous. I think he feels bad, and now I feel bad, but it isn't as if I'm the only one who ever does something stupid or gets hurt. It got me thinking about that whole time. That's when I realized it wasn't long after that incident that my parents separated." You stayed quiet. "As a kid, I didn't think about the consequences of my actions, or how what I did impacted other people. Like, why should anyone care? I'm the one doing it, not them. It made no sense, and I still cared when other people did things I didn't like, but I was 8 and mostly just mad that nothing felt like it was in my control." You could tell that he was building up to something, so you nodded for him to continue. "I was pretty difficult to deal with because of that attitude, but looking back, I think that's what saved me from something a lot of kids go through, blaming themselves for their parents' divorce. It never crossed my mind that anything I did made a difference on my mom and dad's relationship. They would do what they did no matter what. Now, though, I guess it's kind of hard to ignore that thought, huh?
I mean,
Their situation was already so hard, and I wasn't a good kid, so..." He felt his words adrift as he looked down, the conclusion unfinished. It was silent between you. But only for a second. Cove pulled himself up to his full height, his chin held aloft. Whatever he decided, he was resolute. "I'm going back. I've got to talk to my dad. I'm not gonna let things be like before, where I just feel crappy and refuse to even tell him what's going on. That doesn't work for either of us. You can go ahead if you want. I won't mind. I still really want to do this, and I'm sure it'll be okay." "There's no way you're going off on your own. We always look out for each other, remember?" Cove smiled gently, having wanted that deep down. "Thanks. Let's go." You and Cove retook your steps down the docks, once more, heading back to Mr. Holden's scuba shop. The customers you'd spotted in there before were now leaving the store, new bags clutched in their hands. You hoped that this would mean Cove could have his conversation without a public audience. This time, Cove strode inside the shop with purpose. Mr. Holden, still at the counter, glanced up to greet whoever had come inside. He grinned as you approached.
How's it going?
"Hello again. Forgot something?" "Sort of." Cove had reached the counter now. You'd needed to rush just to keep up with him as he crossed the show floor. Mr. Holden raised an eyebrow, taking in Cove's shift in attitude, and chose his next words with care. Is everything all right? Cove swallowed, not answering initially. Talking openly with his dad was still somewhat new for the son. You knew that he was struggling for the right way to begin. I wanted to ask about what happened. Mr. Holden winced, as if the words had struck him physically. The accident? No, the divorce. The pained expression fell from Mr. Holden's face. Wide-eyed, his jaw slack, he gaped at Cove.
Huh?
Why? Cove glanced over his shoulder at you. As your eyes met, you saw him draw confidence by having you by his side. He turned back to his father. I wanted to know the truth. His tone was grave. Did me getting into the accident hurt your marriage? If I hadn't done it, would you and Mom have gotten along better? Ha! No! Hell no! Mr. Holden quashed the suggestion with a gravity you'd rarely heard in his voice. You were 8 years old. You're not responsible in any way. Kira and I should have protected you. I can understand why you're feeling that. What happened was so horrible. How could it not have an impact? It did. It was a reflection of us as parents. The relationship between just your mom and me was separate and already unsalvageable. Cove turned away. His brow still furrowed as he looked at the floor. Maybe I'm being anxious and it's taking over, but it wasn't just then. I always caused problems. He plowed on, unwilling to give up without explaining his worries. What if I'd been easier to raise, or if you'd had me later on? Maybe even if you didn't have me at all, it might have been better for the two of you. If I didn't have you, then what good would my life be? Mr. Holden didn't let the words hang unchallenged in the air for even a second. He hurried over to Cove, taking his son's arms in his hands. Cove, listen, there is only one person to blame for things not working, and that's me. Cove opened his mouth to speak, but Mr. Holden forced on, determined to erase any question in Cove's mind. I'm not saying this to dishonestly push accountability off from someone else or to throw a pity party for myself. You want to know the truth, so that's what I'm giving you. Your father is the reason our family couldn't stay together. You think you caused trouble? You should have seen me at your age. You're such a good kid. I can hardly believe how good you are. Mr. Holden's eyes were misty as he squeezed his son's arms. There's nothing, absolutely nothing you need to blame yourself for. I'm sorry, Cove, to you and Kira. Mom? Yeah, your mom. His pained face erased slightly into a bittersweet smile. Kira, she was just so smart, driven, and completely bursting with life. It was as if she could do anything. You know, there wasn't a single solitary person who didn't want even a piece of her attention, just to catch her eye for a moment. But for some crazy reason, she had a soft spot for my 17-year-old screw-up self. That's when we first met, though it definitely took some time before I managed to ask her out on a date. Mr. Holden shook his head, smile melting as his recollection became solemn once more. And then we'd only been officially together for about 6 months when we found out we were having a baby. I was so worried, so scared, but she was so brave. She was my rock. But we both knew the road ahead was going to be rockier. When we got married, I didn't see it as a dream come true. I wasn't about to start living my life in the only way I could imagine doing so. I thought what happened, and throwing my cards in with a girl like her was worth the risk. He grimaced, the sentence sour in his mouth, regretting his past perspective. I'd been taking care of myself on my own and getting by. Then all of a sudden I was going to have a wife and a child. So I thought, all right, I'd better step things up and take care of all of us. And that's what I did. Sort of. He rolled his eyes. I made money, kept a roof over our heads, and put food on the table. But I was always busy focusing on taking care of things, that I didn't stop to consider what anyone else was thinking or what they actually needed. I made every decision about what I did, and as a result, what happened to the family, by myself, never asking what your mom felt or even wondering if she might have an opinion. I'd tell Kira about the great place I'd found and how we'd be moving there in the same breath, or that I'd spent all our savings and taking out a loan to start this business we're standing in, and even more nonsense, anything I felt I needed to do, I did. Kira couldn't even ask where I'd been all day without me rolling my eyes like she was being a nag. I was making sure we didn't starve, obviously, right? Couldn't she trust me? He sighed, his head hung low. She went to school part-time while raising you, really knuckling down, but that didn't matter to me back then. She could have spent her days laying in bed, not dying, and I would have felt the same. I didn't care. I was going to get it all done on my own, either way. It's so stupid. I admired her more than anyone when there was nothing at stake, yet as soon as responsibilities were involved, I couldn't let myself rely on her. He combed a hand through his hair, searching for an understanding of his own younger self. I'm not even sure why. Maybe I had something to prove. Maybe I'm the one who didn't trust her in the end. Poor Kira. She had to spend every day mentally weighing the pros and cons of putting up with my horrible ideas for the sake of peace, or trying to explain to my blockheaded self what I was doing was wrong. It must have been so stressful and frustrating, constantly having to let everything go because I was stubborn and absolutely would make a fight out of it. He snorted bitterly. I was definitely stuck in my head a lot those days. Our relationship at that point was made of arguments and cool tolerance, but I still genuinely didn't see the divorce coming. We'd made it through the first few years, and after that I never really considered it ending. It was just how life was. In retrospect, it's clear Kira kept thinking on it more every year, especially because she managed to finish her journalism degree, and with us being more stable, financially, that is. She thought of everything. She even timed it right when your school ended for the year, so the process would hopefully be all settled before you had to worry about classes again. We were already talking about it before the accident ever happened. I know I took it really hard, being a sad sack all around the neighborhood, but even that is unfair of me. When it shook out, I'm the one who got everything. Kira didn't want to leave you, Cove. She never would have. I'm certain she felt like she had no choice but to end the relationship. The business was doing really well by then, so I had an easier time making a living. She was between jobs, and when she did get a new job, it meant that she'd be traveling all the time. That's why she willingly accepted me having full custody. She didn't get to be there with her child for so many moments, and you had to spend half of your life growing up without your mother, and it's my fault. Mr. Holden closed his eyes briefly as he took a deep breath. So that's it. The story of Cliff and Kira's marriage. Not exactly a fairy tale, but I want to be clear. You saw his grip on Cove's arm tighten. No matter what happened with me and her, I'd never, ever want to miss out on being your dad. Cove's throat bobbed as he swallowed. His eyes glistened, glossy with tears that had yet to fall. He blinked quickly, trying to hold them back. Thank you for telling me. His voice was hoarse, little more than a whisper. Mr. Holden brought a hand up to his face and lightly nudged Cove's chin. You're welcome. You're a grown-up now, right? You deserve the truth. That's the least I can do for you. Coves managed a fragile smile. Thank you for taking care of me. For all of it. Mr. Holden brushed the compliment off with a wave of his hand.
No worries.
It was nothing. Look at where we ended up. I've got this whole entire store, a house, friends here, a very thoughtful son, and it's all good for me.
I'm so glad.
I'm glad. His voice was still quiet, and he ducked his head shyly after saying the words. Mr. Holden patted him on the back. You could see the tears in Cove's eyes, still shining, threatening to spill over. Mr. Holden put an arm around his shoulders, gently steering him towards the door. You should go have fun. Make some nice memories. Cove's gaze flickered over to you. The watery smile on his face solidified. All right. Good, now out you go. Mr. Holden nudged the two of you out of the shop. You both walked silently as you made your return to the docks. Cove's face was pensive, clearly still digesting everything his dad said. He finally sighed, catching your attention. He hesitantly reached for the bag he had brought and raised it up. Hey, Claire, I want to call my mom. I'm not going to leave her out of things, and I want to know what she thinks about what happened and all of that. He fiddled with the straps of his bag. It still remained close shut. It's not like I don't trust Dad. It's just Mom's thoughts are important too. Yeah. You knew why Cove needed to talk to both parents for this. His dad could only tell one side of the story. You gave Cove a quick nod of approval, and he returned a soft smile. He seemed relieved that you understood. You knew he didn't want to be a bother with another delay. Thanks. Then I guess there's no time like the present time to ask. With that mini pep talk, he finally opened his bag and found his phone. Cove unlocked it quickly and tapped over to his favorite contacts. He called up his mom and put the phone on speaker as it dialed. Cove must have had her phone closed because she answered almost immediately. This is a pleasant surprise. I thought you'd be getting back to me later. Hey, Mom. He paused for a second and then looked at you. You're on speakerphone with Eclair, too. Hello. Oh, hello. I'm popular today. Well, what's going on? Don't keep me in suspense. Are you a pro jet skier already? Cove chuckled and scratched the back of his head. We haven't started yet. Actually, there's something I kind of wanted to ask you about.
Really?
I'm intrigued. Her voice was bright and excited. Cove moved the phone closer to his face so he could speak softly, aware that the tone of this conversation was about to change. I was talking to Dad earlier. It was about your relationship and why you both divorced. Ah. That one syllable had lost all her earlier energy. Cove tightened his grip on his phone. It does make sense that the past would come up today. Yeah, but... He tried to brighten up the mood again. You weren't used to him being the perky one of the two. You could only imagine it felt like a strange role reversal for him. Dad said you were really amazing. He admired you a lot. What a flatterer. She sighed wistfully, and you could hear some interference. Maybe she had shaken her head. You couldn't tell for sure. Oh, Cliff. He bungled himself through regular, everyday adulting and social situations in astoundingly charming ways. Yet somehow, at the exact same time, he was an ambitious, slightly shady, under-the-table type of man when it came to making his living in the world. So essentially, your father was an absolute heartthrob for someone such as myself. Cove and Kira laughed delicately. The tension was broken into something lighter, more familiar between the two. It's cool you both have nice things to say about each other. I agree, baby. She took a moment before continuing carefully. Do you have questions about what happened? I'm not sure. Cove squinted at the phone in his hand as he tried to think, his free hand brushing through his hair. I just kind of wanted to know how you'd describe what it was like. Could I tell you what Dad said about it?
All right.
I don't think Cliff would mind. Whatever he told you is probably what he'd say to me. All right, go for it. I really do like the way this is written, and I like the fact that while the parents understand that they have issues, they are still on pretty good terms with each other. And maybe it took a little bit to get there, but not that I've had a situation where my parents have been divorced and unable to. I have aunts and uncles who are kind of in a situation where and at least one of them is not handling it in a adult way. So this is nice. Anyways, after taking a breath, Cove recapped Cliff's experience, doing his best to follow his dad's story. He went into a surprising amount of detail, and not a single thing was missed. Kira listened in absolute silence, letting her son speak without interruption. When Cove finished, he took another deep inhale of air. So, what do you think? Kira sighed softly. You heard a clicking noise like she was drumming her nails on the back of her phone or on a countertop. That definitely sounds like Clifford. It's not exactly wrong, but he doesn't have a total picture. He puts the emphasis on the wrong places, I think.
Huh?
What do you mean? For starters, Cliff unsurprisingly downplayed himself more than he had to. He did. Cov's eyebrows raised and his face continued to inch even closer to the screen. Well, since your dad was so praising of me, it's only fair to return the favor. When Cliff said he was already taking care of himself when he met me, he means he was on his own. Cliff's own parents weren't and still aren't friendly people. They've always had a combative relationship, though him getting into drinking and gambling as a teenager certainly didn't help. He knew they'd kick him out at 18, so he saved them the trouble and left home at 17. He also found a way to make it work, even without support. I met him a few months after that. We hit it off right away. It was exactly what I wanted back then. We dated, and then about half a year later, bam, you were on the way, Cove. She laughed fondly as Cove clung to every word. I was really optimistic about it all. I couldn't wait to be a mother, and I was more than happy that Cliff was the father who'd be along for the ride. We got married quick, before you were born. Cliff's recollection of our wedding dynamic is pretty spot on. He was extremely stubborn and just, well, immature. Highly, highly immature. Her voice raised slightly, and you got the feeling she was thinking back to her memories living with him. She left the specifics unspoken. But it's not like I was grown up either. Everyone except maybe Cliff could see our relationship was no good, or at least not good enough yet to commit to. I knew, but I didn't want to give it up. I wanted to keep the family together. I thought that if we divorced or were never together, then we'd ruin your life, Cove. Obviously, that wasn't true. I just didn't have enough experience at the time to realize there wasn't only one option for us. Maybe things would have been easier if we had split when you were still a baby, but it took me years to start figuring it all out. Cove nodded. Even if his mom couldn't see it, thinking hard about something, he was likely remembering his own experiences back then. We were married, but never seriously loved each other. We hardly knew each other. I don't mind that Cliff never viewed marrying me as some kind of dream come true. I honestly just appreciated that he tried giving me my hastily made life plan a shot. I was the one who proposed after all, got down on one knee and everything. She laughed slightly, something between a chuckle and a sigh. It's very funny and a little sad that Cliff still doesn't know why things changed between us. It's obvious to me, and I'd guess he does know deep down. He just never consciously made the connection.
It's all right.
I'm not even mad he didn't stay the same towards me. Love makes everything different. But you said, I know what I said. She interrupted before Cove could even finish his blurted out interjection. I don't mean Cliff and I. We were just two kids in a relationship that only ever worked when it was at its easiest. And then you were born, little Cove James Holden. I loved you immediately, and so did your father. Cove was stunned. His eyes started watering as his mouth clamped shut. The inclination we had towards each other paled on the face of that. Our love to you was the real deal. Cliff was the proudest papa. Then in true Cove fashion, tears began to fall. He stayed silent. You were pretty sure Kira knew the effect her words had on her son. No matter how much time passed, Cliff never got over how amazing it was that such a precious little boy was his. I should have taken pictures of how he'd puff up whenever someone referred to you as his son. She sounded much cheerier now. A slight smile crept over Cove's face despite his tears. Then again, he still does that now. It wasn't hard to imagine Mr. Holden lining up around baby Cove the same way he did with 18-year-old Cove. I remember how, when a real argument started brewing, Cliff had a habit of walking away to cool off. He wasn't able to handle it. His son seemed to have taken after him in that way. You heard her chuckle, and Cove looked down, a blush clear on his cheeks. He could just feel her smirk through the phone. She breezed over the next section airily. For our whole relationship, he always ended fights by skipping out on me, for who knew how long. I didn't think even Cliff knew when he'd come back. That stopped when you were born. Cliff stopped running. He was still gone a lot for work, and we still had fights, but he wouldn't leave. Instead, he'd go to your room, Cove. If you were asleep, he'd just sulk on the ground by your crib until you woke up. Sometimes he'd pace the room while holding you, or sitting on the floor and rocking you. He'd stay with you until one of us decided we were ready to talk again. We didn't have a lot of furniture back then. That's part of the reason why Cliff was always hanging out on the floor. He really came to embrace it. When our relationship got bad enough that we didn't want to share a bed anymore, he always made sure I got to have the mattress. He instead set up a spot in the corner of the nursery, just in case you needed anything through the night. He gave you a more private space when you got bigger, but he still always made sure he could be there for you. There's still no denying, whether Cliff understands or not, he made his choice without prioritizing me. But it wasn't that he suddenly hated me. To Cliff, I was only a wife on paper. In his mind, I was a cool girl he had dated and generally liked. Nothing close to being the light of his life. All his blood, sweat, and tears weren't for himself or me, or even the family unit. They were all completely and totally for his baby. Meanwhile, I was doing the same, though in the opposite way. I did take us being married seriously. I was trying to force us together as a couple so we would be a complete family for our child. You felt like a fly on the wall of a very personal conversation. Cove didn't seem to notice when you looked over at him. His face a complicated patchwork of
I
emotions.
guess.
Eventually, I woke up and saw what I was doing. I realized it wasn't going to work. Not like that. When I was ready for it, I talked to Cliff about separating and starting up the divorce process. He was shocked by it, and unfortunately, it wasn't too long after when you had your accident, Cove. Claire, I don't know how much Cove really told you about it, but when he broke his arm, it terrified all of us. Cove could have died. Even back then, we knew he'd likely have a permanent scar he'd have to live with forever. Our parenting hurt our child, and he was the one who had to carry the repercussions. You were a bit taken back by the to be referred to directly. You still felt a little out of place, and she seemed completely focused on her son. Cove grimaced, and then hand holding his phone shook. Mom. Kyra continued as if she'd never paused. It was heartbreaking, and then on top of it all, we had to put you through your parents breaking up. Taking that back wasn't an option, despite the timing. It felt like everything we had worked so hard for, to make you happy, was for nothing. I chose to believe we'd fixed our lives from there, but to Cliff, it seemed hopeless. He failed his son. It was easier for me in some ways. I had my family to lean on. That made it feel less daunting, less impossible. Cliff had only ever really known being on his own, by that happenstance of his birth, and then by chance. When we broke up, he knew he was going to have to put back the pieces of what was left, alone. I wanted to be there for him even after everything, but I was the one divorcing him. It was impossible. I never managed to be someone he truly relied on, and I had to remember that wasn't changing. As bleak as it felt at the time, Cliff still tried not to let any of that show to you, Cove. He did what he could to keep your spirits high about the move, your new house, the scar, everything. So that's why Cove drilled off. He had misunderstood the impact of his injury had on his parents, and were reminded of something that made more sense now. Mr. Holden had been so helpful with Cove's old Halloween costume because he didn't want Cove to be saddened by the scar. It was clear Cove was coming to the same realization. Now, with that all said, if Cliff was a completely perfect and wonderful guy, I wouldn't have left him. If it was even pretty good, I would have stayed. It was hard not to have custody. Sometimes I felt like I was a fun aunt rather than a mom I always wanted to be. It might have overcompensated a little at times because of that. She forced a laugh, but it had an uncomfortable edge to it. You could tell she was trying to blow off a very real anxiety of hers. Cove looked ready to say something, but his mom kept talking, kept moving forward. Still, it's not Cliff's fault alone that our relationship didn't work. We were always better as co-parents than spouses, but I knew when separating that it wasn't going to be even. And Cove, the only reason I could stand not being there for you all the time is because I knew that if the situation was reversed and I could have provided a more stable environment, Cliff would have done the same. Your dad would give up his house, his shop, even his right arm, if it would guarantee that you were safe and happy. So, as painful as it was, I was sure you'd be okay because you were still with someone who loved you more than anything else in the world. Cove lowered his head, tears falling to the ground. He tried to speak. It took him a few tries. Thank you for telling me. His voice cracked and Kira made an alarmed sound on the other end of the line. I'm sorry, baby. I didn't mean to make you cry.
I get it.
It's okay. He was still crying. Everyone could tell, being physically present or not. I love you, Mom. You've always been my mom, not some aunt. My mom. I love you too. Her tone was thick with emotion. She was at the edge of her voice break herself. I'm so lucky to be your mom. She started to sniffle openly.
Don't worry.
Don't feel bad for me with how it worked out. I promise that none of it was your fault, and it's not as though I'm completely miserable over here. I have an incredible life with a beautiful baby boy of my own who calls whenever he can. At that, Cove's tears only came down heavier. Thank you. Kira sighed affectionately, and you could hear the warmth in her voice. I think that's good for now. Maybe we should end the call. Take a moment. Is that really all right?
He tightened his grip on his phone. You could see how emotionally exhausted he looked.
Of course.
Of course, we'll be in touch soon. For now, you'll have to be able to keep thanking me or apologizing. Cove cried out defensively over the accusation, making his mom snicker. Bye and goodbye to you, Claire. I'm glad you're there for my baby. Goodbye. Bye, Mom. I love you. Love you too. Cove hung up. He let his hands drop to his side, his phone brushing the fabric of his wetsuit. His other hand went up to his face. He tried to wipe the tears from his eyes. His face was red, and he struggled to put his phone back in his bag one-handed. You could tell he was getting worked up. He finally just used both of his hands and sealed his phone back into his normal place. Cove sniffed and then reached out for you. His hand trembled in your grasp and you squeezed back. He needed to feel your support. You want to go see your dad again? He didn't have to tell you what was on his mind for this. Cove nodded his head weakly. You rushed back the way you came, feet pounding across the boards of the dock to return to the scuba shop for the third time. You reached his dad's door and Cove still wasn't slowing down. He pushed his way through the door at full speed. His hand released yours as he charged in. Mr. Holden had been walking around the middle of the store, checking over things. Immediately, he turned at the sound.
What's wrong?
Where's the fire? He froze when he got a look at Cove's face. He hurriedly opened his mouth, probably to ask what was wrong, but then Cove launched himself at his father. Cove threw his arms around Mr. Holden's neck and buried his face in his dad's shoulder and started to sob with deep, hitching breaths. Clifford clearly had no idea what was going on, and his hands hovered awkwardly in the air. He looked at you for a brief second, hoping for understanding before turning all his attention on Cove. He wrapped both his arms around Cove's back. Cove looked secure in his father's embrace, protected and safe. It's okay, it'll be okay, whatever it is, it's going to be okay. Cove kept crying. He inhaled deeply, his voice choked up when he tried to speak.
I'm so sorry.
You always tried to be there for me when I was growing up, and I was mean to you, I'm sorry.
What?
What? Mr. Holden was completely taken back. He hadn't expected this to be the issue. You don't have to apologize for that, bud. Kids are allowed to be mad at their parents. It's my job to take care of you. I really didn't do anything special. Cove shook his head as emphatically as he could while still tucked in against his father. You've always supported me no matter what. You've always loved me. I wish I realized how much you did sooner. Cove squeezed him tighter. Thank you. I love you, Dad. At his son's heartfelt confession, the father became choked up as well. He compressed Cove into a crushing hug. I do love you. I always will. You can count on that. I want to be there for you, too. They clung on to one another, absorbed in the moment. Then after a little while longer, they slowly began to loosen their hold. Cliff sniffled and moved so he could use his palm to wipe away his tears. His dad's shirt was visibly damp where his face had been. Cliff patted the top of Cove's shoulders. He looked at his son with pride. We've grown up so much. Cove started to laugh through his tears, a wavering smile on his lips. He doubted that Cove would have ever thought that crying on his dad's shoulder was a sign of maturity, but it was true. Cove had changed over the years. You were glad to see Cove grow. Cove used to cry a lot over his parents, and he still did. Despite the similarity, the defining Coveness, there was a big difference between the two occasions. You're proud of him. Cove wiped at his eyes again. You're a good dad. You're a good son. Mr. Holden was plainly touched by the words and beamed at his beloved child. Cove looked away and shyly traced his scar. Cliff chuckled and released Cove to rub the back of his neck. The earlier panic had bled off and left the confusion. I'm glad we had this talk, but what was it that made you cry in the first place? You weren't too bad off when you left before. Oh. Cove dusted his head further down, getting a very good look at the scuff mark on the floor. I called Mom. I wanted to talk to her about all this. He kicked one of his feet shyly, swinging it back and forth against the ground. Things felt really hard when I was younger, but it wasn't just me going through stuff, Dad. You never gave yourself credit. Cliff smiled gently and gripped Cove's shoulders with reassurance. Kira's an amazing person to come to my defense. For me, the only hard part was seeing you and her unhappy. Everything else, that was nothing. He wrapped an arm around Cove's neck for another side hug. Cove leaned into the embrace and glanced up at his dad. Your old man is tougher than he looks. Check out how powerful these arms are, and this is 10 years on. I was in my prime those days. Cove laughed. It was a light sound, full of fondness. Okay, okay. He quieted down a little, finding a quick moment of seriousness. Thanks, Dad. Dad, I know you don't want me to feel bad, and I'm happy because of everything you and Mom did. I have a really nice life. Mr. Holden's countenance became much more serious. He didn't take what was said lightly. Cove, you are very welcome. That's so good to hear. Then he let Cove go again. This time, they both took a step back to their normal proximity. Mr. Holden cleared his throat. He looked at you right in the eyes.
That's a relief.
I also appreciate that you were here for support, Eclair. What a true friend. Cove looked back down, embraced. You're both so sweet. You grinned at the couple of big softies. Cliff smiled warmly. He nudged Cove gently, as if to say, look how lucky you are. All right. Cove exhaled slowly, his posture relaxing. We better get going. You still have work, Dad, and I think Eclair has been patient enough. I didn't bring her here to watch me cry to my parents. Cliff grinned and waved the two of you off. Sure thing. I'm happy you both stopped in, but you gotta go have some fun. Be careful out there. I don't need to go jet skiing anymore, Eclair. If you still want to go, I don't mind watching. No way. You're a mature young man, and if you want to jet ski, then you should go out and jet ski. I'll still be here if you need anything, right? Yeah, okay. I almost forgot why I came out in the first place. Cove waved to his dad as he started walking out. You followed. When you turned back to Mr. Holden before you went out the door, he was waving. Bye, kids. You'll do great. Once again, as had become today's habit, you and Cove walked down the dock side by side. But this time, Cove had a bounce back in his step. His smile was soft but radiant. Thanks for staying, and sorry for how long it took. You'd do the same for me. You had his back, and he had yours. It was just how things went between the two of you. He sidestepped to lean in closer to you and wrapped his arm around you. You relaxed into his embrace as he held you tight. You hugged him back. You could smell the scent of the ocean on the breeze and feel the warmth of his chest. He exhaled and took a step back, his face a dazzling smile. The water lapped at the dock beneath your feet. Cove looked down when a particularly strong wave crashed against it. It's weird to think about my parents' relationship. There's all this stuff that I don't know because I wasn't there, or because I was just a kid, or because I didn't even exist yet. It feels really complicated. Relationships are complicated. You agreed with him. Connections to other people were as varied as there were waves in the ocean. Cove nodded without elaboration. He looked out at the ocean wistfully for a moment before he shook it off.
It's nice.
I'm happy they were married, even if they didn't stay together in the end. That was nice to hear. He was feeling better. You tried to refocus on what was ahead. The two of you began to move quickly, make your way across the boards. Despite your excitement, you were both careful. Neither of you wanted an accident, especially after what happened with Cove's first jet skiing trip. You finally got to the rental place. You were surprised at how easy the process was. It took no time at all for Cove to climb on his jet ski with shaky legs. Yeah, you rented your own jet ski. Why not? You did say you wanted to try it. You'd spent this entire time wanting to jet ski and were thrilled to finally climb onto one. It was lime green with blue detailing. The jet ski rocked slightly as you got on, bobbing with the waves. You looked across to Cove, where he sat motionlessly astride his jet ski, preparing himself to start it up. Even from your distance, you could tell his hands were clamped onto the handles too tightly. He was stiff and nervous. It's all right, Cove. Trust yourself. He took a deep breath. You could see the rays and fall of his chest.
Thanks.
Thanks, Eclair. He inhaled slowly and started up the jet ski. It roared forward, and you were surprised you could hear him squeak over the sound of the engine. He stopped after a few seconds and breathed again. After he'd calmed down, he started up once more. Cove sputtered and stalled with it for a while, going a little further each time. He grew more comfortable with the feel. He continued to struggle with the jet ski, but he refused to let that stop him. He kept going until he wrangled the machine into submission. Cove eventually reached the point where he only stopped the jet ski when he had something to say. He kept shouting things at you. This is amazing! Did you see that, Eclair? This is so great! You had gotten your own jet ski going as well. You made sure to keep a safe distance. Cove watched what you did with enthusiasm. Nice turn! He zoomed forward and you could hear his bright laugh ring across the waves. You were relieved he'd taken to it so well. You were nervous about jet skiing, but you weren't bad at it. Knowing that jet skis could be dangerous, you kept a healthy caution over the vehicle. It was tricky at the start. You drove in short bursts, since each time you made it go forward, it seemed much too fast. You worried that you were going to fly off or the jet ski would flip over. However, it didn't take you long to realize that you had a decent control over the vehicle. You grew more comfortable with the controls and let yourself relax a little. Eventually, the sun set and you had to pack up. Cove was thankful still in one piece, no cast necessary. After everything was returned, Cove dug his phone out of his bag and texted his parents to let them know all about his triumph. An idea to take a photo to mark the occasion struck Cove, and he wanted you to join in the selfie. You covered your face in embracement. You allowed him to take the picture, but didn't show much of you. He awkwardly snapped the shot. You looked at the picture. Cove also looked like he wanted to hide. Somehow it worked. His phone vibrated after only a moment. After texting it out, Mr. Holden and Kier had likely been waiting the entire day to find out how this outing would go. And with the news of his success, both of Cove's parents sent back how proud they were of Cove for how far he'd come. Watching him grinning in the setting sun after facing so many fears that day, you felt the same. Alright, and our last one is one of my favorites, one that I've really liked, is Aaron's. I really like this one. I think it's really fun. So, we're going to go ahead and do this one, and it'll be the last one for this step. From the moment you woke up, you knew that today was going to be busier than usual. There was a list of errands that needed to be finished before the day was done. First up was visiting one of the biggest farmers markets in the area. It was only open 2 weekends a month during certain parts of the year. It was rare that you and your family were able to attend, so your moms liked to make the most out of every minute of it. And you realized it was not just them feeling that way when you heard a whistle from your left side. Wow, this is a swanky show. Vegetables have never seemed so highbrow. Seriously, they don't mess around with their products.
Isn't that great?
Isn't it exciting? Liz crossed her arms. You could tell she was amused. We couldn't have picked a more perfect trip. It's been too long since we've had a true family outing. Her teasing tone said more than she actually did. Your next-door neighbors had joined you this day, and that's what made it a true family outing. The three parents laughed approvingly. Out of the corner of your eye, you caught Cove looking at you sympathetically. Some things never changed, and some jokes never died. You'd long accepted that. You were excited to check things out. There were so many stalls, you couldn't even imagine what hidden gems you might find among them. Bubbling with anticipation, you smiled. Well, I'm ready to get started. I've got plenty of dishes in mind I could use ingredients for. Before your moms responded to that, they glanced at each other and smiled. Yes, that's a very good idea, Cliff. This place is much larger than it seems. It's difficult to visit each part in a single day.
Got it.
I'm sure we can make a decent dent together at least. Actually, since there are so many of us this time, we could take different sides of the market.
Sounds good.
Divide and conquer, eh? That sounds brilliant. Everyone watched your moms, surprised. No one had considered that an option. But your mom flashed a group a dazzling smile, continued with the thought. Though it's a little unfair that there are 4 Swedish family members and only 2 Holdens here, so I'll go with you boys to even out the odds.
Okay.
That's fine with me. Cliff scratched the back of his neck and slowly met Cove's stare. They both seemed unconvinced, but weren't sure what to say about it. Don't worry, we'll be apart for only a few hours, and then we'll have something to talk about at the end of it. Father and son ultimately nodded. This wasn't an argument they were going to win.
All right.
All right, I don't get the point, but I also don't mind spending the first part of the trip with Claire and Ma. Ma clapped her hands together at that. Wonderful. Are the teams ready to go? Hey, I didn't agree to anything. You kept your tone even and confident, and you crossed your arms. It wasn't fair that you weren't given any say. Ma hooked an arm around you in a little side hug.
Yes.
You're right. I'm sorry for not hearing your opinion first, but could you go along with the plan for a little while? The tension relaxed in your shoulders. She gave you another side hug squeeze. Okay. Taking the lead, Mom looked over towards Cove and Cliff, who were still eyeing her confusedly.
Let's go.
Come on, boys, we're heading out. Sure. Okay.
Cove looked at you softly and found himself pulled forward, stopped in front of you. His expression flickered for a moment, hesitant. Bye. Bye. Suddenly, he twitched slightly, his whole body getting stiff. He jerked his gaze back at your mom, and you realized that she had grabbed the hem of his shirt. She gave it a small tug before letting go. Time's a wasting, Cove, and I've known you long enough to be aware that you're one to linger. If I don't stop you now, you'll only drag your feet on parting ways some more. The two of you can survive one morning apart. Probably. We have important shopping to do now. Cove gasped at what he felt was truly obscene thing to say. His face burned red, but that was ignored by him. He spoke with an unimpressed roll of his eyes.
Seriously?
You don't need to literally pull me away from Eclair. I'm not that clingy. Mom snickered with a shake of her head. Cove's eyebrows raised over the reaction, and he turned to Ma. She wouldn't meet his eyes as she whistled innocently. Liz smirked ear to ear, and Cove whipped his head towards his dad. Mr. Holden couldn't offer anything more than an apologetic shrug. It was only then that it dawned on Cove that everyone did think that he was that needy. Finally, he dared to face you with wide, pleading eyes. Who said? No. There's nothing wrong with being attached. It's nice. And you meant it. You very much enjoyed Cove's company and his affectionate nature, but that wasn't exactly a denial of what he was being accused of. Mom's smile grew. Cove couldn't believe that he was being completely outnumbered. His mouth twisted as he struggled to come up with something to stay in his defense. Yeah, well, so what? That admission had Liz, your mom's, and his dad bursting into laughter. Cove grimaced and walked several steps from the group before stopping, he clearly wanting to move on, so much that he was physically moving away. You smiled softly at him. Cove nodded ever so slightly, so you knew that he caught it, and he seemed to feel better just a bit. See you in a few hours. Take care of yourselves. At that, Mom picked a direction and set out into the market with Mr. Holden and Cove following behind her. Grinning, Ma set off with a big wave. Liz gave a daintier goodbye wave herself. Despite the change in plans, you were still glad to be there. It wasn't what you would imagine, but that didn't matter. There was a whole market to explore, and you couldn't wait to find some good stuff. When they were gone, Ma cheerily turned towards you and Liz. She put her hands on her hips. Do you think there'll be any nice ginger around here? We'll have to find out. You nodded in agreement, keen to truly get to the trip going. Ma led you both into a busy market. Some time passed browsing. There were only a few stalls you stopped at. You had fun chatting and laughing, pointing out various things to Ma and Liz and vice versa. At one point, Mom stopped suddenly. She put a hand on her belly and gave a half-hearted smile. I think I should have used the bathroom before we left home, like the two of you responsibly did. Just need to pee?
Yes.
Yes, Liz. I'll have to visit the ladies' room now. Should Liz and I go on without you? Mom creaned forward as she struggled to pinpoint the direction she needed to go. She gently considered your suggestion. Actually, I might need help finding my way. Can you please come, Lizzie? You and your sister had to share a look over that. Why do that of all things?
Hey.
Ma, if anyone should go anywhere on their own, shouldn't it be you? You're the one needing a detour, and you're the parent here. Ma giggled, unfazed by the resistance. Liz, meanwhile, tipped the brow of her hat up, watching Ma skeptically. Soon enough, Eclair would have to handle doing these kinds of errands on her own. This makes good practice. What? Ma hooked an arm around Liz and pulled her along.
Have fun.
Have fun. We'll find each other again later. Excuse me? You stood there stunned. You watched dumbfounded as they waded into the crowd. They were out of sight within moments, and what started as a group outing rapidly became you, entirely on your own. You didn't know what to think. You still couldn't believe Ma just did that. There wasn't a single doubt in your mind that she had some ulterior motives, but for now, you had to figure out what to do next. Well, you texted Cove to meet up. At that point, you had no interest in your mom's plan. If they weren't going to stick around to follow it through, you were going to do what you actually wanted. Taking out your phone, you quickly pulled your chat with Cove up and sent, "Hey, would you want to shop with me, or could I join your group? Ma and Liz left me." It wasn't long at all before you got a response back. Cove responded in a rapid-fire message. What? Wait. Where are you? You took a survey of your surroundings and then sent him a description of where you were and the path you took to get there. While you waited for his response, you watched all the people moving around and past you. There wasn't a single familiar face. When your phone received a new text, you breathed a sigh of relief. Okay, I'm on my way. Thank you, Cove. Cove couldn't get there fast enough. There wasn't any reason that you could think of why you had to wander around the market alone. You placed your phone back where it belonged and checked around for a nearby stall to kill timeout. One pulled your focus. While most stalls are selling various garden-grown foods, this one had an array of homemade fudge, or even vegan versions of every option. Oh, you got close to the stall. You sidestepped past a few other people and got yourself right in front of the counter for a better look. There was a wide spread, dozens and dozens of delicately cut squares of decadence. The owner smiled and approached you to explain their shop. The fudge is sold in boxes of 4 pieces. They either can be all the same, all different, or any mix you like. Are you looking to buy any today? Yes. Want to get a box for yourself. Your mind was already filling with thoughts of sinking your teeth into the delicious fudge. There was no walking away empty-handed now. You wanted to get a box just for Cove. Looking at the treats made you think of Cove. You grinned, hoping he liked what you picked out. And we'll go ahead and get a box to share with everyone. The whole selection was too good not to share. That was all. Yeah, I could use some fudge. I'm glad you came to the right place then. For yourself, you picked milk chocolate, chocolate peanut butter, of course. I'll try a red velvet. Not that I can actually eat any of these, so. For the group, you picked, well, let's do cookies and cream, white chocolate peppermint, maple walnut, and a dark chocolate mint. And then for Cove, I don't remember if I've ever, give him red velvet, caramel swirl, cookies and cream, and a milk chocolate. The shop owner carefully put your order together. You couldn't help but try to imagine how Cove might react when you presented this to him. Everyone else was definitely going to be happy when you regrouped later. You paid, and there was no stopping the large grin going all across your face. Oh, I want chocolate now. I'm so hungry. Pivoting on your heels, you wove your way back to where you were initially and kept yourself on alert, trying to spot Cove among the crowd. For the next several minutes, you stood there on high alert, trying to spot Cove among the crowd. You broke into a smile when you saw his familiar seafoam hair sticking out above the mask. He hadn't seen you yet, but Cove was walking with purpose in your direction. You noticed he was hefting a couple bags in his hand. Cove? The moment his name left your lips, you were certain your voice didn't project enough, but he stopped dead in his tracks. Alert, Cove's head snapped up and his eyes searched the crowd until they landed on you. His whole demeanor brightened at the sight. Eclair! But even from a distance you could tell his mood shifted again. He seemed serious. He weaved through the passerbys awkwardly in an attempt to get through as fast as reasonably possible, nearly stumbling more than once. It only took a moment for him to arrive.
You okay?
Are you all right? You quietly nodded. Is Mom mad you left? No. Well, yours weren't the only ones who just leave. Your mom took my dad before you even messaged. You're kidding. I wish. Can't believe this happened to both of us. They planned it. They had to. But I don't know why. Are they pranking us? I don't know either. And you meant it. You couldn't fathom what your moms were up to. Cove shook his head, trying to clear his mind. Well, I guess things are just up to us now. Yeah. So, his gaze wandered off as if one of your parents might simply appear if he kept checking, and you could tell he was still processing the situation. He scratched the back of his head, looking sheepish. Do you still want to go shopping with me? Happily, you nodded. It felt good knowing you were going to have company for the rest of the trip. Cove seemed to be thinking the same thing because his body seemed to relax then. It was finally time to take some control back over your day.
Don't worry about it.
Even if we have to make our own fun, we're gonna have a good trip. Cove smiled at you encouragingly. Made you feel more optimistic now. Having him there was already comforting, and now he also seemed determined to improve your day by any means. That had you looking forward to what was coming next. So, where to first? I don't mind going back the way I came if it's new to you. It's not hard to miss stuff, even if I've gone past it.
What have you gotten? Cove shuffled his bags around and started pulling them open so you could peek inside each one. You recognized the array of things he picked up around the market. I mostly got typical things I can use pretty easily so far. Nothing super exciting. There were a few onions, some lemons, and sweet potatoes, among other things that were wrapped up so you couldn't discern what they were. What Cove bought made sense, but it was far from a complete selection. You glanced around at the nearby stalls. Want to start over there? Cole followed your eyes to see you pointed at one of the larger stalls. It was filled with several kinds of staple fruits and vegetables. Yeah, let's go. Once a few people finished paying and moved, you and Cove got yourselves directly in front of the shop. There were so many things to pick from. Peaches and strawberries. Carrots. And that's everything. The shop owner put your selection together and handed it to you all in a single bag. Happily, you paid and waited for Cove to make his purchase. Ready to go? Cove grinned, satisfied with his new choices. He had added another bag to his small but growing collection. You nodded.
All right.
Okay, now let's go. Together, you and Cove wandered the market on the lookout for any stalls that caught your attention. Cove was walking around with a spring in his step, talking about the various meal ideas he had in mind. After a while, you had to go greater distances to find something of interest. Several of the stalls were selling the same foods, same goods. It was only a matter now of which you wanted to buy from. You continued ambling down the path until Cove disappeared suddenly from your peripheral vision, pulling you away from your thoughts. Cove? You spun around, spotting him some steps back. He was standing still. You followed his eye line past the crowds. Immediately, you knew what had grabbed him. Homemade jams and local honey. Ooh, honey butter. That stall was glittering with great glass jars stacked high, each encasing gels of varying colors. Cove's eyes were practically sparkling at the sight. His feet automatically began to take him there, likely without being fully aware he had made an unexplained detour. When you got closer, you were surprised there were even more varieties than you thought. There were even different honeys based on what type of pollen the bees used. Cove's focus seemed torn between a bottle of blackberry jam and one of clover honey. You want some honey, honey? Dumbfounded, Cove nodded in response. His face was burning red. You grinned, way too pleased with your own joke. You thought things over for yourself, too. Orange blossom. You know, I would like, that sounds kind of good. Like, does the honey taste different? Too much different? Ooh, honey better. We'll go with the orange blossom honey, and then, is there blackberry. That's everything. You paid, and the shop owner started putting together your order. They carefully packed it in a single bag with paper. Thank you very much. Amused, you watched Cove give in and just buy both the clover honey and the blackberry jam. He also went all in, getting spring wildflower honey and plum jam too. The shop owner thoughtfully wrapped each in a brown paper to protect them before putting them away in a bag, and handed the purchase to Cove. Thank you. You both stepped away from the stall. Cove didn't fail to notice the look you'd been giving him since he agonized over his toast toppers. Hey, this doesn't go bad for a long time, so why not suck up? I could have chosen one if I wanted to. All right, Cove. It'll be nice to enjoy snacking on it for a while. As you began to stroll, Cove looked up at the sky. He smiled. It was sort of unexpected, considering all of this was technically an errand, and unexpected changes often upset him. But he was happy, and Cove liked doing this kind of normal thing. And you could tell that Cove especially enjoyed doing these kinds of things with you. You blushed, thinking about how comfortable doing this with Cove felt. It felt more than normal or mundane. It felt right. We're so domestic. Cove took a sharp intake of air and started coughing for a moment. Afterwards, he refused to look at you. Are we?
Well,
I guess we are. Later, when you spotted a less crowded area, you took a break from browsing. Cove started rummaging through one of his bags just to check on how his goods were doing. A smile grew on his face as he went on to the next. You chuckled, knowing that Cove wouldn't let anything go to waste. There wasn't a single doubt. He was gonna eat it all. You held a hand in front of your face as you squinted upwards. The sun had moved quite a bit. You'd been in the market for a good while now. Neither your feet nor your arms were sore right now, and Cove looked to be doing fine too, but that was something that could be coming. There was a price to pay for this much shopping, and it wasn't always just the money. You quietly enjoyed the break from walking. There was a breeze, and you just barely noticed in the air, and you contentedly sighed, happy that the weather was cooperative for the market, It made things even better. Why don't I carry your stuff for a while? I don't mind, and I figure your arms could maybe use a break. Thanks, but no thank you. Cove looked away from you and stretched the back of his head, his voice come out softly. Okay. And with that, you and Cove continued your trip through the market together. Ma and Mom had both texted you during the trip, though only to say that they hoped you found some good stuff and that they'd see you later. There were no answers on where they went or why. You and Cove continued to wind your way through the bustling market, the list of outstanding items steadily shrinking while bags grew heavier. Eventually, Cove realized that he hadn't checked his own phone in a while. The two of you came to a stop in the nearest alcove, where you'd be out of a steady stream of people perusing the stalls, and he pulled out his phone. Cove rearranged all the bags he was carrying, freeing a hand so that he could pull out his phone. He watched his eyes dart over the screen as he read the waiting message. Not important. I can reply to that later. He mumbled his verdict under his breath. Then Cove's face scrunched up with confusion.
Huh?
Wait, I've got a message from my dad. Listen to this. Cove, I wasn't part of the plan. I didn't know what was going on when I left with Eclair's mom. Where are you? He sent that ages ago. I didn't hear it come in. He sent another one since then. Says he hopes I'm all right and that he's not bothering me. The newest one says everybody's going to the parking lot soon and we can meet up there. He lowered his phone, his eyes narrowed. The same conclusion that was settling on you had landed on Cove as well. So it was on purpose. He lifted the phone again, staring hard at the screen. Didn't my mom pull this stunt when we were little? You know, that time she took us to the mall? At least your mom said she was leaving. Is this a mom thing? Cove blinked, a slight frown furrowing his forehead. He didn't seem to know how to respond to this. The crowd of people passing by stayed as noisy as ever, a sharp contrast to the silence that had fallen over you and Cove. He was rubbing the screen of his phone against his shirt, wiping away dust and debris. He continued scrubbing the screen long after anything could have remained, the action a poor substitute for pushing away the awkwardness of the moment. You felt alright about all of it. There was no malice behind the plot. You were quite sure of that. Your moms must have had their reasons for doing this, and it hadn't harmed you in any way. You shrugged.
Are you okay?
Are you alright? His voice was gentle. He nodded firmly. That's good. Abandoning us without warning wasn't really a cool idea, even if they meant well, which they probably did. He looked you straight in the eyes. Not making a big deal out of this is nice. I'm not exactly thrilled, personally, so if you do want to complain to me, you can. Okay, I'm disappointed. Maybe I am kind of mad. Cove nodded, as if he'd been expecting it all along. I didn't want things to be like this, but they didn't even talk about it. I didn't get a chance to say anything. Cove listened, nodding gently as he unburdened yourself. You then drew a deep breath, the fresh air steadying you. You didn't stop until your lungs were full. Cove watched over you, still concerned.
Sorry.
I'm sorry, even though I guess it's not exactly my fault this time, but is there anything I could do to make you feel better, even a little? Can I have a hug? Cove spread his arms wide, his expression as open and welcoming as his stance, beckoning you forward. You couldn't help but smile at how easy that was. You walked into his embrace, returning it by wrapping your arms tightly around him. Cove held you. It was restorative, rivaling even the best night's sleep. You parted, and the smile on your face still bright. Cove smiled back at you and patted your arm, giving you a little additional research, just in case the hug hadn't been enough. Clearly, he was underestimating the charm of his own hugs. After a moment, he stepped further away from you, face turned. Cove closed his eyes and took a deep breath. His brow creased, then furrowed deeper into a scowl, his arms tightly coiled together. So they did do something stupid. I knew it! His voice was taking on an exaggerated quality, but what truly distinguished it from Cove's typical speaking tone was the abundance of rage. This is such a chore. Parents are so dumb. Why do people have to go places with family members anyways? I hate them, and I also hate farmers markets. You got it instantly. It had been years since the boy with the bull cat had been in town in the summer, but Cove had never forgotten. To this day, he continued to unleash his impersonation whenever the moment felt right. Sometimes you wondered if the act had grown more exaggerated over the years, or if the kid really was always that ridiculous. That kid's never gonna live that down, huh? Not ever. Cove gave you a lopsided smile, letting the joke rest for now. Come on, we should probably go meet up with the group. Yeah. You didn't dally any longer, slipping back into the crowd and making your way towards the entrance of the farmer's market. It didn't take long to reach the parking lot. Your parents, Mr. Holden and Liz, were already waiting there, and they waved at you both as you approached. Your own family seemed to be in pretty good mood, in contrast to Mr. Holden. He stared at Cove with open concern as you got closer. Hey, bud. Hey, Eclair. How are you doing? We'd be doing better if we hadn't been abandoned in farmer's market by our families. You saw your mom frown at his response. Ma glanced from Cove to Mom with blinking eyes. Just because Eclair is shy and tries not to complain doesn't mean you can just leave her out of your plans and expect her to go with it every time. Ma hung her head, ashamed, and Mom had a hand pressed to her cheek. You could tell that they were quickly regretting their scheme. I'm so sorry, Eclair. Her words were full of emotion. Mom squeezed Ma's hand. We were trying to make the errand more of a trip, less of a chore. Ma nodded. We didn't think you, Cove, and Liz wanted to be stuck trudging around the market with your parents all day, especially not in the summer. But you're always very thoughtful and don't like to leave your moms behind, so we did ourselves. It was only going to be for the market, not the other stops, I promise. Still, you're right. We could have just told you and let you make your own call. I really am sorry. Neither of us meant to upset you. All gas, no brakes, and we should have known better. Sorry. Ma ditched me too after pulling her urgent potty break stunt. If that helps, I went off to do my own shopping as it seems they planned. Sorry, I didn't check back in with you. I wasn't thinking. It just tried to blow it off. You quietly took in their stories of what happened. Over to the side, Cove was talking to his dad. Thanks for telling me something was up, though I feel bad for missing the warning when you sent it. It's no trouble, sport. I learned my lesson about making surprise plans. Cove smiled at his dad. Mr. Holden laughed, clapped Cove on the back. Wow, we're really being outplayed today. You realized you hadn't been the only onlookers to the Holden's moment. Your moms were exchanging rueful looks. Liz had her arms crossed over her chest, patiently watching it all unfold. Yes, looks like it. We'd better find some way to catch up.
In that case,
Maybe we can do Eclair's chores for the next week. Mom jabbed Mom on the shoulder. You may be onto something, Eclair. How'd you like the sound of that? They looked at you hopefully. Yeah, you don't have to do anything. I think we do. Come on. And at the very least, we can make sure everyone stays together for the rest of the stops we're making today. You all nodded at the suggestion.
Yes.
We won't let you down. We'll be the best sheepdogs ever, guarding the flock and catching any strays.
Honey.
We could at least be shepherds. You chuckled, your mood lifting in spite of the bumpy morning. It was going to be all right. You turned to the entrance of the farmer's market for one final glance, pressing it into your memory under this new light. You thought on what you'd picked up at the market and how you were going to enjoy it later. Some things you could only get from local suppliers like this. That was another perk about coming along to the market today. Actually, you realized this would be a good time to bring out the fudge you got to share, while everyone was clustered together. You cleared your throat. I got something for you all. The announcement grabbed everyone's interest, and they looked over at you, each curious about what you had in store. You dug your hand into the bag and pulled out the specially selected treat. It's fudge. There's only 4 pieces, but I thought we could try a little each. Oh,
Aw.
that's so sweet of you. The Holdens were wearing matching grins at the prospect of free dessert, their family resemblance more notable as they mirrored each other's expression. Sweet is the right word for this. Thanks very much, Eclair.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
You're fantastic.
Great, can't wait to bust it open. We should save it for tonight. You can't properly enjoy a treat when there's still chores to be done. Besides, we don't want to make a mess with it melting in this heat. The others murmured their agreement and nodded. Reaching a consensus, you stowed the box away safely for now. Cove then sidled up next to you, an eager smile on his face. You could tell from his expression that he was up to something. Thanks again for getting fudge. It's really cool of you. You knew he hadn't come over just to thank you individually. Not with that huge smirk. I got something to share too, but, well, only really with you. I guess I'm not as nice. Oh well. You smiled wearily at him, eyebrows raised. He laughed. Anyway, well, I sort of picked something out with you in mind.
You held a hand to your chest, staring at Cove as he explained further.
I mean,
Since your moms decided we should shop separately, I figured I could use the time to get you something, just as a little surprise. He reached into one of his bags and retrieved one of the wrapped up objects. You accepted the unexpected present. He looked on excitedly as you tore off the paper. It was a glass bottle of strawberry cream drink. You didn't need to taste it to know that it would be nice. It was a boutique product. It was heavy in your hands, the container and smart metal cap reaffirming the quality. Even the label, constructed from horse paper rather than a flimsy sheet of plastic, was distinctive. You were practically bouncing in anticipation, and he smiled sweetly at your reaction. It's not a big deal, but it just thought you might like it. You're always getting me things. So? You weren't the only one who had that idea, His eyes began to widen. I got something for you, too, when you weren't around. There was a burst of laughter, first from your mom, followed by a chorus of chuckles from the other three. You'd forgotten that they were still hanging around. Unfortunately, they hadn't paid you and Cove the same courtesy and had been listening in on your conversation. You weren't even apart for a whole day, and you both still used that as a chance to get each other little gifts. Ma clasped her hands together, eyes bright.
Good job.
That's so lovely. A day? It was less than a whole morning.
Right?
True, I don't even want to think about what would happen when they spend real time apart. That's my boy. You reached back into the bag where you had first retrieved the box of fudge for everyone, shuffling it aside to take out the other one underneath. Your cheeks were reddening. You spoke quietly, hoping that this time only Cove would hear. That one was for everybody, but I got another for you. Cove's face lit up. His grin stretched from ear to ear. The laughter that came from the others, who were fully tuned into your little show, didn't appear to reach him. You wished you were similarly impervious to it, but you were embraced.
seriously?
Really? It's only for me? Cove reached out and took the box in both hands, holding it like a precious treasure. Thank you, thank you, thank you. He looked at you with shining eyes. At this rate, it wouldn't just be your little group that knew that you'd been treating him. The whole parking lot was going to learn about it. Behind Cove, you could see Mom watching you both with a smile of hilarity. See, this is why he's so attached. You've spoiled him. You shouldn't make fun, Pam. It's clearly mutual. Besides, I don't hear you complaining when I'm spoiling you. Ma pinched Mom's cheeks, making her laugh as she batted the hand away.
True.
True. Liz clapped her hands together with the air of a teacher calling for attention. Since the other adults aren't acting like grown-ups, the rest of us are going to have to pick up the slack. It's time to get back on schedule and continue with the rest of the errands. Playtime is officially over. Ma laughed while Mr. Holden grinned awkwardly. Mom hung her head in an exaggerated display of mock defeat. Kids are tough, and I can't even call them kids anymore. Liz tut-tutted with amusement at her mother. Cove shrugged, staying a neutral observer, but the small smile on his face revealed that he was enjoying the conclusion. You nodded, relieved that everyone was getting along. That your trip to the farmer's market was closed. It was time to move on. There were too many of you for one car, so you and Cove had wound up in Mr. Holden's car on the way over. You figured it made sense to do the same for the next leg of the journey. You sat next to Cove in the back. Immediately after the click of the seatbelt in its lock announced that Cove was safely strapped in, he began to unfold the box of fudge he'd been given. You're gonna eat now? Uh-huh. He nodded eagerly, not taking his eyes from the container. He lifted the top off and longingly admired the selection inside. Milk chocolate fudge is a staple. You can never go wrong with that. That looks like cookies and cream. That's a really cool flavor for fudge. They had one with caramel? Wow, it's gonna be so nice. Hey, red fudge. That's gonna be... red fudge. That's gotta be a red velvet flavor. You're right. Knew it. Delicious. I love red velvet. Once Cove had finished bestowing praise on what you'd picked, he promptly started sampling the selection. He was smiling, licking his lips, and having a grand old time. You could also tell from the way his nibbling was turning into munching that the box wasn't going to survive the trip to the next stop. You were right. Cove had tried to savor the treat, claiming just one more until there was only one left, and the statement was finally forced to be true. He finished the last one, too. He sighed contentedly.
Thank you.
Thanks again, Eclair. Those really were great. You're welcome. He set the picked clean box to the side, then rested his hands on his spoiled tummy. Cove wasn't going to be hungry for a while after that. From there, he sat wordlessly, gazed drifting to the window. You knew Cove well enough to spot the signs of when he was physically present but mentally elsewhere. The way he would fall quiet, staring without seeing, the long blinks, all of which he was doing right now as he looked at nothing in particular. He licked his fingers absent-mindedly, getting the last of the melted fudge off his hand. Is it too late to ask for a taste? You teased him. Cove straightened up at the sound of your voice, his pose stiff. He turned away, his hand smacking over his mouth instead. What has you so lost in thought? Cove idly rubbed at his face. Honestly, I was just thinking about how nice it was to know you. It, makes life better and everything. Though he was turned away from you, his eyes were round and sincere. Not that this is a new revelation, but today was another reminder. I'm lucky. I feel lucky too. He peeked at you from the corner of his eyes, still too shy to look at you directly. You smiled at him affectionately, eliciting an equally caring smile from Cove in return. You felt content, secure in your relationship with Cove. You decided to enjoy your drink now. You twisted off the cap and brought it to your mouth. Even before the first sip reached your lips, the scent tickled your nostrils. You took a swig. It was refreshing, the perfect way to hit the spot after a long morning trolling through the market. It's good. Thank you. He grinned at you, pleased that his pick had been well
You're
received.
welcome.
You spent the rest of the day completing the remaining errands all together as a group. You had enjoyed your brief independence. It might not have come about under ideal circumstances, but it had proved that you with an opportunity to spend some time making your own choices. You felt that you'd risen to the challenge. And that is it for step 3. It's good. Alright. Well, the next video will be the last, so can't wait to see what happens there.